Picture this. You're standing on the deck of a pirate ship in the middle of the Caribbean, nursing last night's rum headache, when suddenly a cannonball tears through your vessel like it's made of paper. Water's rushing in, your crewmates are screaming, and the nearest port is 3 days away. No Coast Guard, no rescue helicopters, no calling tech support. Just you, your crew, and whatever scraps you can cobble together to keep from becoming permanent residents of the ocean floor. This is the reality that pirates faced almost daily during the golden age of piracy, and somehow these guys kept their ships afloat using nothing but creativity, desperation, and a shocking amount of tar. Today, we're diving deep into the world of emergency ship repairs at sea, and trust me, it's way more intense than anything you've seen in the movies. Let's start with the most urgent problem any pirate could face: a massive hole in your ship's hull. And I'm not talking about a tiny leak you can ignore until payday. I'm talking about cannonball-sized holes that turn your ship into a floating colander. When you're in the middle of a naval battle and British warships are turning your vessel into Swiss cheese, you've got exactly two choices: fix it fast or start swimming. And considering most pirates couldn't actually swim, option 2 wasn't particularly appealing. The first rule of emergency ship repair was brutally simple. Anything and everything that could plug a hole became more valuable than gold. I'm talking about clothes, blankets, food supplies, even the captain's prized possessions. There's a documented case of one crew that stuffed their captain's expensive silk shirts into a breach during a battle. Legend has it he wasn't thrilled about his fancy wardrobe becoming permanent ship fixtures. But here's the thing: he was even less thrilled about drowning. When you're ankle deep in seawater and the ocean's getting a free invitation into your ship, fashion concerns tend to drop pretty low on the priority list. But pirates weren't just randomly stuffing things into holes and hoping for the best. They had a secret weapon, and it was called oakum. Now, oakum sounds like some exotic pirate treasure, but it's actually way simpler and way grosser than that. It's basically old rope fibers that have been picked apart and soaked in tar. Every pirate ship worth its salt kept massive supplies of this stuff on hand, because holes in ships were about as common as bad teeth in the 1700s. And let me tell you, that's saying something. Studies of skeletal remains from that era show that roughly 9 out of 10 sailors had significant dental problems, but I digress. The genius of oakum was in how it worked. The tar made it waterproof, right? But here's the clever part: the fibers would expand when they got wet. So you'd stuff this tar-soaked rope into a hole, and as soon as water hit it, it would swell up and create a tight seal. It was like the world's most disgusting self-inflating Band-Aid. This temporary fix could mean the difference between sailing home to spend your plunder or becoming a permanent underwater attraction for fish. Now, stuffing oakum into a hole worked great for smaller breaches. But what happened when you had a really big problem? That's when pirates had to resort to something called fothering. And this technique is absolutely wild. Imagine trying to patch a hole in your jeans, except your jeans are underwater. They're the size of a wall. And if you mess up, everyone dies. No pressure, right? Here's how it worked. The crew would take a large sail, cover it completely in tar and animal fat to make it waterproof, then drag this massive canvas under the ship. The pressure of the water rushing into the hole would actually help press the sail against the hull, creating a seal from the outside. It was like putting a giant underwater Band-Aid on your ship. The whole process was messy, incredibly dangerous, and about as elegant as a drunk parrot trying to dance. But it worked. Crews would have to dive under the ship to position the sail correctly. And remember, This was centuries before scuba gear or even proper goggles. These guys were just holding their breath and hoping for the best, while sharks probably circled curiously. For holes above the waterline, pirates got to play carpenter. If by carpenter you mean someone desperately nailing planks of wood while probably getting shot at, they'd slap wooden patches over the holes faster than you could say incoming, then seal the edges with tar. Speaking of tar, let me tell you about this stuff because it was absolutely essential to every single repair job. The tar pirates used wasn't some synthetic modern product. It was pine tree sap that had been heated until it became thick, black, and sticky as hell. Pirates called it black gold because it was literally worth its weight in gold when you were taking on water. But here's where things get really creative. Some clever pirates discovered that bread made an excellent emergency plug for small holes. Yes, you heard that right. The same stuff you make sandwiches with could save your ship. The bread would absorb water and swell up, creating a temporary seal. I have to wonder about the first pirate who figured this out. Picture the scene. Ships taking on water. Everyone's panicking, and some guy just throws his lunch at the problem. Quick, throw the sandwich overboard. Not exactly conventional thinking, but when you're desperate, innovation takes some weird turns. Now here's the part that nobody talks about in pirate movies. While you're trying to patch up your ship, you're basically sitting ducks. Every minute spent hammering planks or stuffing holes is a minute you can't fight back. And let me tell you, there's nothing quite like trying to nail a plank straight while cannonballs are whistling past your head. It's like trying to thread a needle during an earthquake on a boat while someone throws firecrackers at you. The stress levels must have been absolutely insane. But perhaps the most impressive thing about these emergency repairs wasn't the techniques themselves. It was how quickly pirates had to learn them. You didn't get a training manual when you joined a pirate crew. You didn't attend pirate university with courses like Intro to Emergency Hull Repair or Advanced Tar Application. It was all hands-on learning, usually in the worst possible conditions. Imagine your first day on the job, and suddenly you're expected to know how to stop a ship from sinking using nothing but old clothes, tar, and pure determination. Talk about a steep learning curve. Of course, plugging holes was just the start of a pirate's repair worries. Because eventually, especially when the wind picked up, you'd hear that sound, that dreaded cracking noise from above. Every pirate's worst nightmare, the mast giving up on life. And trust me, when a 60-foot wooden pole that weighs as much as 3 elephants decides to call it quits, it's not exactly a quiet affair. There goes your afternoon nap and probably your entire week. You'd be surprised how often this happened back in the golden age of piracy. Historical records show that about 1 in every 4 ships suffered major mast damage during long voyages. 1 in 4. Why? Because apparently Mother Nature thought it would be hilarious to test just how much wind a tree-turned pole could handle. Spoiler alert, sometimes not as much as you'd hope. Now, when a mast broke, pirates had 2 options: replace it or fix it. Replacing sounds easier, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. First off, spare masts were about as rare as honest politicians in the 1700s. Most ships couldn't even carry full-size spares because they took up too much cargo space. Space that could otherwise be filled with more important things like rum, gold, or more rum. So what did they do? They got creative with repairs. And by creative, I mean they turned into maritime MacGyvers. The first step was getting everyone to stop panicking and cursing. And given that pirates weren't exactly known for their calm demeanor, this was like trying to convince a cat to take a bath. Once that minor miracle was achieved, the real work began. The most common fix involved something called splicing. Basically, you're trying to convince two pieces of broken mast that they're still one piece. It's like relationship counseling for wooden poles. Here's how it worked. You take the broken ends, line them up just right, and start wrapping them with more rope than you'd find in a hangman's warehouse. And I mean a lot of rope. Some clever pirates figured out that heating the ropes made them shrink as they cooled, creating an even tighter grip. It was like putting a cast on a broken leg. Except this patient was vertical, weighed several tons, and was the size of a small building. If you were lucky enough to have iron hoops on board, these would get hammered around the splice for extra reinforcement. The whole process took hours of back-breaking work, and one wrong movement meant either starting over, or worse, watching your handiwork collapse and take half the rigging down with it. Can you imagine the frustration? You've just spent 6 hours wrapping rope around a broken mast. Your hands are bleeding, your back is killing you, and then suddenly everything comes crashing down. I'd probably jump overboard at that point. The record for the biggest mast ever repaired at sea was on a Spanish galleon in 1742. The repair job took 3 entire days, used up nearly 1,000 feet of rope, and somehow stayed intact long enough for the ship to make it to port. The crew celebrated by drinking so much they couldn't climb the newly fixed mast for 2 days afterward, though honestly, that might have been a blessing in disguise. The last thing you need after a marathon repair job is someone climbing the mast and testing its structural integrity while drunk. The real test came after the repair was done. You had to raise the sails slowly, holding your breath and probably saying every prayer you knew in every language you could remember. It was like trying to fly a kite made of gold that you really, really didn't want to crash. The whole crew would watch, waiting for either success or spectacular failure. There was no in-between. Either it held, or you were back to square one, except now you were out of rope and everyone's morale was in the toilet. But even if you managed to fix the mast successfully, you still had to keep a constant eye on it. These repairs weren't exactly shipyard quality. They were more like maritime duct tape, good enough to get you where you needed to go, but not something you'd want to bet your life on in a storm. Though sometimes, you didn't have a choice. You know what made all this even more challenging? Trying to keep your balance on a rocking ship while doing all this repair work. At least the holes in the hull had the decency to stay at deck level. But mast repairs? That was like trying to do construction work on a tightrope during an earthquake. Some poor souls had to climb up the damaged mast while it was broken to assess the damage or attach ropes. Imagine climbing a 60-foot pole that's barely attached to anything while the ship is rolling in the waves, and oh yeah, it might break again at any second. These pirates either had nerves of steel or absolutely no sense of self-preservation. Probably both. But even with a perfectly repaired mast, you weren't going anywhere if your sails looked like they'd been through a cat fight. And let me tell you, sail repair was its own special kind of hell. You haven't seen true despair until you've watched a pirate trying to sew a massive tear in a sail while the wind's doing its best to turn that same sail into the world's largest kite. It's like trying to thread a needle while riding a mechanical bull, only the bull is in the middle of the ocean, there's no safety mat, and your thread is as thick as a shoelace. The needles pirates used for sail repair were no joke either. These weren't your grandmother's sewing needles. They were basically mini swords, about the size of your hand and heavy enough to double as a weapon in a pinch. Fun fact, these sailing needles were so valuable that some pirates actually included them in their treasure shares. Imagine being the guy who got a needle instead of gold doubloons during the loot split. Hey, congratulations on the successful raid. Here's your share. 1 needle. Enjoy. Talk about drawing the short straw. Sailors had a special technique for sewing sails that they called palm and needle seaming. The palm part came from a thick leather pad they wore on their hands. Without it, pushing those monster needles through thick canvas would have turned their hands into something that looked like they'd arm wrestled a porcupine. Even with the palm protector, most sail menders had forearms like blacksmiths from all the pushing and pulling. You could always spot the guys who did sail repair on a crew because they had these ridiculously muscular forearms and hands covered in calluses and scars. Now, get this. A typical pirate ship in the 1700s carried around 7,000 square feet of sail. That's about the size of 3 tennis courts. And every single inch of that massive area needed to be maintained regularly. Think about that for a second. 7,000 square feet. That's not just a lot of fabric. That's an absolutely insane amount of fabric that's constantly being battered by wind, salt water, and whatever else the ocean decided to throw at it. The thread they used wasn't your ordinary sewing thread either. It was wax twine, thick enough to hang your laundry on, and coated with beeswax to make it waterproof. Some clever pirates figured out that coating the thread with tar made it last even longer, though it made the whole process messier than a toddler's first attempt at finger painting. Everything got sticky. Your hands, your clothes, the deck, other crew members if they got too close. It was a disaster. But what happened when a sail was too far gone for repairs? When it was more whole than fabric? That's when pirates showed off their recycling skills. Pirates were the original upcycling experts. They'd cut down damaged sails to make smaller ones, or turn them into anything from clothes to bags to bandages. Some creative crews even made temporary shelters out of old sails during island stops. One famous pirate ship reportedly had a complete set of sail canvas hammocks for the entire crew. Talk about sleeping in your work. Though I bet those things were scratchy as hell. The real nightmare was trying to replace an entire mainsail. Ever tried to fold a fitted sheet? Now multiply that frustration by about 1,000, add some waves, throw in a few angry seabirds who think your new sail is invading their airspace, and that's what pirates dealt with when installing a new sail. The mainsail was enormous, heavy, and completely unmanageable in any kind of wind. It took the entire crew working together, and even then, things could go horribly wrong in seconds. Sometimes pirates would resort to stealing bedsheets from captured ships to patch their sails, because nothing says fearsome pirate quite like sailing under grandma's floral bedding. Can you imagine? You're this terrifying pirate crew, and your ship is approaching with sails that look like they came from a Renaissance fair. The intimidation factor definitely takes a hit. You might think all this sewing would be a peaceful activity, a nice break from all the plundering and pillaging. Wrong. So wrong. Try concentrating on your stitches while the lookout's screaming about approaching ships, or when there's a storm brewing that could turn your careful needlework into confetti in about 30 seconds. It was like trying to do delicate surgery during a boxing match. Here's something fascinating. Some pirates became so good at sail repair that they could actually identify what ship was approaching just by looking at the patch patterns on its sails. It was like a criminal's version of reading fingerprints. Oh yeah. That's definitely Captain Johnson's ship. I recognize that terrible stitching job from the Battle of Bermuda. These guys developed an encyclopedic knowledge of different crews' repair styles. It's weirdly impressive when you think about it. But even with the best maintained sails in the Caribbean, you weren't going anywhere if you couldn't control where those sails were taking you. Which brings us to one of the most terrifying failures a ship could experience: a broken rudder. Losing control of your ship because of a broken rudder was like trying to ride a blind horse that's had too much coffee. You might be moving, but good luck telling it where to go. And let me tell you, nothing sobers up a crew faster than hearing that sickening crack from the stern, followed by the wheel spinning freely like it's auditioning to be a windmill. That moment of realization, when everyone stops what they're doing and just stares at the useless wheel, must have been absolutely terrifying. The rudder was basically a giant wooden paddle stuck on the back of the ship, and it had one job: steering. But boy, when it failed spectacularly. Get this. About 40% of all shipwrecks in the 1700s were caused by steering problems. 40%. That's right. Almost half the ships that never made it home got lost because they couldn't turn properly. It's like trying to drive a car with no steering wheel, except the car is the size of a house, floating in the middle of nowhere, and there's no AAA to call. Sometimes the rudder would just get loose. That was actually the easy fix, if you can call hanging off the back of a ship with a hammer easy. Pirates would have to nail it back in place with wooden pegs and iron spikes, all while trying not to become fish food. The real fun started when waves kept smashing against the rudder during repairs. One minute you're hammering away, focused on your work. The next minute, a wave hits and you're getting an unexpected swimming lesson. Many a pirate has been knocked off the stern by a rogue wave during rudder repairs. But when the rudder actually snapped off completely, that's when pirates had to get really creative. They'd rig up what they called a jury rudder. Basically, it was a heavy plank or several planks tied to the stern with more rope than you'd find in a hangman's annual convention. Getting this makeshift rudder to work was about as graceful as teaching an elephant to ice skate. It took at least 6 strong men to control a jury rudder, and they had to coordinate like a synchronized swimming team, except with more cursing and significantly less pointing of toes. These guys had to work in perfect harmony, because if even one person pulled at the wrong time, the ship would veer off course. And unlike a car where you can just straighten out your steering, correcting a ship's course took minutes, sometimes hours. Here's the part that'll blow your mind. The worst part wasn't even the physical labor. It was the math. Yes, you heard that right. Pirates had to do geometry. They needed to calculate the right angle for the temporary rudder, or they'd end up going in circles like a dog chasing its tail. These were guys who probably hadn't seen the inside of a schoolroom since they were kids, and suddenly they're doing trigonometry in the middle of the ocean. The irony is not lost on me. The record for the biggest temporary rudder ever rigged was made from 3 dining tables lashed together. 3 entire tables. The crew had to sacrifice their eating space for 2 weeks while they limped to the nearest port. They ended up eating their meals, sitting on cargo boxes, probably plotting mutiny between bites. Pass the salt, and maybe we should have kept at least 1 table for eating. The real heroes in these situations were the poor souls who had to swim under the ship to attach ropes or check the damage. Remember, this was before scuba gear, before proper goggles, before any kind of underwater breathing apparatus. These brave pirates would take a deep breath, dive down with a rope clenched in their teeth, and pray they didn't run into anything with teeth of its own. Sharks were a constant concern. So were the mysterious things that lived in the deep. Sailors in that era had a very real fear of sea monsters, and honestly, given what we know lives in the ocean, can you blame them? Some clever crews developed a system of pulleys to make steering with the jury rudder easier. but this often resulted in an elaborate web of ropes across the deck. Walking around became like playing the world's most dangerous game of hopscotch. One wrong step and you'd either trip a rope controlling the ship's direction or get tangled up like a fly in a spider's web. More than one pirate ended up hanging upside down from the rigging because they weren't watching where they stepped. But hey, at least rudder problems kept you on your toes, literally, since you had to constantly adjust your balance as the ship wandered all over the place like a drunk trying to walk a straight line. Now, even if you managed to handle all these major repair emergencies, there was still one constant, never-ending battle that every pirate crew faced: the real headache of that constant drip, drip, drip of water finding its way into the hull. You know, every wooden ship leaked. That wasn't a design flaw, it was just a fact of life, like taxes or bad weather during vacation. The average pirate ship took on about 200 gallons of water every single day. 200 gallons! That's more water than most people use in a day, just seeping into the ship, which meant the crew spent more time moving water out of their ships than most people today spend watching TV. Keeping up with leaks was like playing whack-a-mole with water. Plug one hole and another one would pop up somewhere else, just to spite you. The gaps between wooden planks were the worst enemy. Over time, these gaps would open up like yawning mouths, letting in enough water to make even the fish uncomfortable. The wood would swell when wet, shrink when dry, expand in heat, contract in cold. It was like the ship was breathing, except instead of air, it was inhaling ocean. The pirates' secret weapon against leaks was called caulking. Now, caulking sounds fancy and technical, but really it just means stuffing things into cracks until water stops coming through. The process of fixing these gaps was about as pleasant as a dentist appointment, only longer, wetter, and smellier. Pirates used oakum for this too, the same stuff they used for emergency hull repairs. Old rope fibers soaked in tar, stuffed into every gap they could find. But here's the interesting part. The best oakum came from old ship's ropes that had been used for years. Why? Because these ropes had been soaked in salt water, tar, sweat, and who knows what else, making them perfect for plugging leaks. It's probably the only time in history when having old, worn-out equipment was actually better than having new stuff. The older and more disgusting the rope, the better it worked. The really fun part came when they had to apply hot pitch over the oakum. And by fun, I mean absolutely miserable. Pitch was basically tree sap that had been heated until it became thick and black, like molasses from hell. The smell was so bad it could make a skunk apologize. We're talking about a stench that would linger in your nose for days, and it stuck to everything: clothes, hair, skin, the deck, other crew members. Once you got pitch on you, it was there to stay. Some sailors swore their grandchildren were born with tar stains because of how much the stuff got into their blood. Pirates sometimes mixed animal fat into their waterproofing cocktail. They'd save every bit of fat from their meals for weeks, rendering it down to mix with the pitch. Imagine cooking dinner, and instead of throwing away the bacon grease, you save it to waterproof your house. That's basically what they were doing. The record for the most animal fat used in one repair job was held by a Spanish galleon that reportedly used the equivalent of 50 pigs worth of fat. Talk about bringing home the bacon. The job of actually applying this disgusting goop was usually given to the newest crew members. Because apparently, welcome aboard, translated to, here's a bucket of burning hot tar, try not to drop it on yourself. Working with hot pitch was like trying to paint with molten lava. One wrong move, and you'd have a souvenir scar to remember it by. Some pirates got so covered in the stuff during repairs that their crewmates started calling them tar babies, though you'd better believe those nicknames were only used behind their backs if they wanted to keep their flive teeth. But this wasn't a one-and-done job. Ships needed constant recaulking, especially in warm waters, where the wood would shrink and expand like a living thing. A smart crew checked caulking every few weeks, which meant someone was always covered in tar. You could usually tell how well-maintained a pirate ship was by counting how many crew members had permanently black hands. The more tar-stained hands, the better maintained the ship. Sometimes, though, patching leaks just wasn't enough. When barnacles covered your hull, when shipworms had eaten half your planks, when the damage was so extensive that Band-Aid fixes wouldn't cut it anymore, there was only one solution. Find a nice quiet beach where you could do some major repairs. Pirates called it careening, and it was simultaneously the most vulnerable and most necessary thing a ship could do. Careening meant deliberately running your ship onto a sandbar or beach during high tide. When the tide went out, your ship would lean to one side, exposing the hull like a whale taking a sunbath. The entire bottom of the ship would be exposed to the air, allowing crews to do the kind of repairs that were impossible while floating. Here's something that'll blow your mind. Ships in the 1700s had to be careened about every 4 months. 4 months. That's because these wooden vessels collected more unwanted passengers than a free bus ride. Barnacles, seaweed, algae, and these nasty little creatures called shipworms would attach to the hull and make themselves at home. The shipworms were the absolute worst. Despite the name, they weren't actually worms, but more like tiny clams that absolutely loved eating wood. A bad shipworm infestation could turn your hull into Swiss cheese faster than you could say abandoned ship. These creatures would bore into the wood, creating tunnels and galleries that weakened the entire structure. If left unchecked, shipworms could literally eat a ship from the inside out. The whole careening process was like a twisted version of a ship spa day. First, they'd scrape off all the sea creatures, a job that probably made cleaning your shower look like a vacation. Some ships collected up to 2 tons of barnacles. 2 tons. That's literally the weight of a car in crusty sea life clinging to your hull. Getting all that off required specialized scrapers and countless hours of back-breaking work. Then came the really fun part, checking every inch of the hull for damage. Any spots that looked suspicious got the full treatment. New planks, fresh oakum, and enough tar to make an oil company jealous. Crews would replace entire sections of hull if necessary, hammering in new planks and sealing everything with their signature cocktail of pitch, tallow, and sulfur. Speaking of that mixture, it smelled worse than a middle school locker room after gym class. The sulfur was particularly pungent. But this cocktail of stinky stuff was like sunscreen for ships. It kept the nasty sea creatures from making your hull their all-you-can-eat buffet. The coating would last for a few months before needing reapplication, buying the ship time before the next careening. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. While your ship was getting its beauty treatment, you were basically sitting ducks. Pirates had to post lookouts everywhere because nothing says perfect target quite like a ship stuck on its side on a beach, completely unable to move or defend itself. The famous pirate Bartholomew Roberts once lost his entire ship to the British Navy during careening. Talk about bad timing. It's like getting caught by your parents while doing something you definitely shouldn't be doing. The work itself was no picnic either. The entire crew had to help, and it was all done under the burning sun. They'd coat the entire hull with their waterproofing mixture, working from sunrise to sunset. Remember, these guys didn't have protective gear. No gloves, no respirators, no safety equipment of any kind. They'd be breathing in sulfur fumes and handling burning hot pitch with their bare hands. OSHA would have a field day. Some clever pirates came up with a ranking system for beaches good for careening. The best ones had deep water close to shore so you could get in and out easily, lots of trees for cover so you weren't completely exposed, and fresh water nearby for the crew. The worst beaches? Well, let's just say more than one crew had to abandon their repair job halfway through because someone spotted Navy sails on the horizon. Nothing motivates a repair crew quite like the sight of enemy ships. Suddenly, everyone becomes a master carpenter. Work that would normally take 3 days gets done in 3 hours. It's amazing what mortal fear can do for productivity. This might seem like an exhausting amount of work just to keep a ship floating, and you're absolutely right. It was exhausting. It was dangerous. It was uncomfortable. It required skills that most people spent years developing, and pirates had to learn them on the fly while literally fighting for their lives. But that's exactly what made pirates so impressive. These guys kept their ships running with nothing but ingenuity, determination, and enough cursing to make a sailor blush, which, when you think about it, they already were. They didn't have modern materials, power tools, or engineering manuals. They had tar, rope, wood, and pure stubbornness. Every single day at sea was a battle against nature. The ocean was constantly trying to reclaim their ships, and pirates had to fight back with every repair technique they knew. They became experts in improvisation, masters of making do with what they had. When they ran out of proper materials, they used clothes. When they ran out of tar, they rendered animal fat. When they ran out of conventional solutions, they invented new ones on the spot. Think about the pressure these crews were under. One mistake during a battle repair could sink the ship. One miscalculation during mast splicing could bring down the entire rigging. One poorly placed patch during careening could doom the ship in the next storm. And yet they did it, over and over again, in conditions that would make modern sailors quit on the spot. The next time you see a pirate movie where the ship is pristine and perfect, remember, that's not how it really was. Real pirate ships were floating repair jobs, held together by tar, rope, and sheer willpower. They were scarred, patched, constantly leaking, and somehow still sailing. They were testaments to human ingenuity and the refusal to give up when giving up would mean death. These pirates weren't just thieves and fighters. They were engineers, carpenters, and problem solvers who could keep a complex wooden machine functioning in the most hostile environment on Earth. They were men who looked at a sinking ship and said, "Not today," then proceeded to fix it using nothing but scraps and determination. So the next time someone romanticizes the pirate life, remember the reality. It was months at sea, constant repairs, dangerous work, and the ever-present threat of your ship falling apart beneath your feet. But somehow, against all odds, they made it work. And that's the real treasure of the pirate story. Not the gold they stole, but the incredible resourcefulness they showed in keeping their floating homes alive, one repair at a time.